the trashiest wedding you've been to? Story 1. My friend group and I talk about this wedding to this day and probably will for the rest of our lives. The bride and groom decided to do things on a very, very small budget. That's fine. Frugal weddings and budget weddings can be beautiful and nice. There is a difference between a frugal wedding and a cheap wedding, Weaver, and this was cheap. For instance, the wedding was in July. They decided to eld it in a non-air-conditioned park shelter. Dumb. The decorations were actual trash. The bride decided me and the other bridesmaids needed tiny top hats, which she made from discarded styrofoam cups. Mine had ants in it. She asked me to be the MOH. I was flattered but confused. She'd had 3 MOHs before me, and they all quit for various reasons, mostly baby daddy drama related. She wanted live music, but wouldn't pay a pianist. My friend Steven's sister said she'd play the wedding march on a keyboard for $50. Said sister couldn't actually play the piano, but she did the pre-recorded wedding march song. Nobody could tell the difference because the woman in charge of baking the cake got faced the day before and was baking the cake in the non-air-conditioned park shelter's little kitchen while listening to the radio, very loudly. The bride and groom tried to write their own vows, got in a fight over it, and didn't tell the officiant until the day of that there were no vows. Fortunately, he was on it and had backup vows ready to go. The bride hadn't tried on her dress, which she'd bought from AliExpress until the day of. It was way too small, and we had to rip out the back and safety pin in some satiny white fabric, which would have been great if the dress hadn't been off-white. The groom made comments, and it turned out that the WLE dress thing was based on his mom offering to pay for the dress, then rescinding because she had to bail out his brother. My friend, instead of going to an actual store and buying a dress, picked one off of AliExpress. This would have been less weird if I hadn't been dress sipping with her like 3 times, because her mom wouldn't pick out a mother of the bride dress. The groom's entire family, including his best man and his 2 groomsmen, left right after the meal. Spaghetti, green beans, and McDonald's orange drink was served. The DJ, my friend Steven and his Bose speakers, didn't know this, and tried to announce the groom's dance with his mom. His mom had left. Apparently, his family was furious that it was a dry venue. The only member of the family left was the ring bearer. It turns out, was forgotten. We had to take him because his family wouldn't come get him. The groom slept through the rehearsal and sweat up to the wedding drunk. We had to put another friend on bouncer duty because 2 of the bride's aunts tried to walk away with the cash envelope. We gave him the envelope because he was the tallest, and we figured he could outrun the aunts. The bride's brother was originally on envelope duty, but we caught him taking a 50 out of the envelope, so we had to take it from him. We had to politely inform the best man he couldn't smoke in the porta-john. We had porta-johns instead of actual working bathrooms. The worst, was the photographer. As MOH, I was informed day of that I had to keep the photographer 100 feet away from the ring bearer and flower girls at all times. He was a registered offender, but also the bride's uncle, and he volunteered to do the pictures for free, so he ended up using a telepto lens because he couldn't get close enough to the wedding party to take the pictures. They divorced a couple months later after the use they were staying in burned to the ground. I have no idea to this day why they even got married. Story 2. Wedding was in a suburban driveway. The maid of Noor stole the bouquet from someone's garden, and the best man proudly announced he had splifted the rings. The groom wore a button-down shirt that set off in fancy lettering. The bride stopped in the middle of the vows to tell her mother to get that kid out of here. It was her second kid by the previous bloke. When it was over, we apologized to the celebrant. He said he'd seen worse. Story 3. A wedding on the beach behind Hooters. The officiant stood next to a trash bin. As if it was planned, the trash collector pulled up during the vows. Did he wait to change the bag? Absolutely not. Children at the wedding swarmed the couple like the flies around the trash can just after the kiss, stepping all over her dress. She bent over to adjust her sandal, and a pack of Marlboro Reds fell out of the bust, along with her right breast. It felt like we were rubbernecking instead, witnessing a marriage. Edit. I'd ask why we all knew this was the panhandle of Florida, Pensacola. But when I read this post to my fiancé, he added, "Humming, you forgot to add the background of boats sporting Trump flags and rental jet skis." Story 4. I was actually the bartender, but it was a OT. First, wedding was outside and it stormed violently. Groom was hammered pre-wedding, hit on all the bartenders. Then the DJ got hammered, made lewd comments to women in the micro-penny. Then basically everyone was hammered, knocked over the wedding cake, which also happened to be a table with many candles, so the place caught on fire. Good times. Often wonder how that marriage worked out. Story 5. The bride made a speech thanking her in-laws for financial assistance for the event. Her mother was not thanked, and she was furious. There was a long head table for bridal party and parents. It was made out of small tables pushed together covered by one long tablecloth. The mother pulled a small table out of the arrangement, catching the tablecloth and nearly destroying the head table set up. Now the bride got angry, and there was much back and forth with various family members attempting to make peace. The mother refused to push back her table and began to invite others to sit with her. All people were not meant to be seated at the front. Mother of bride continued to sit there and talk about her daughter, the bride, to anyone we would listen. Story 6. Woo boy, this is my time to shine. So my uncle was a preacher, but also owned a restaurant. A 16-year-old got married to her 17-year-old boyfriend in the back room. Her name was Candy. After the ceremony, she opened her wedding gifts like it was her birthday. One of the waitresses, Brenda, had given her her old lingerie as a gift. I remember during the reception, Candy went out back to throw the lingerie into a dumpster while Brenda sang, "These boots were made for walking," on karaoke. For their naymoon, her mom bought them a room at the Holiday Inn around the corner, but they got bored so they came me. Story 7. Surely that video of the bride walking down the backyard aisle while dirty dancing to her own Thai recorded cover of Crazy has got to be up around here somewhere. Story 8. I once worked a wedding where come time for the first dance, no one could find the groom. Turns out he went to the resort soding barn to sot clay pigeons. Upon learning this news, the bride reacted by cursing up a storm on the dance floor. Story 9. Ceremony was in a park, not booked or decorated, just sweat up and found a spot. Reception was at a scout hall. No decorations again, and for catering, the bride's family went through Red Rooster drive-thru and got a bunch of WLE chickens and chips. Like 5 different cars went through one after the other and ordered. They didn't even pre-order. Groom and all his friends were high as kites, and only reason bride wasn't is because she announced she was knocked up. Groom and his mates bought their dirt bikes and after eating, went out and rode them around the hall. It was so loud and muddy. Story 10. Both of my middle sister's weddings. Don't get me wrong, she's the sane one of my sisters, and I actually really love her. But she has a, shall we say, unique sense of style. Wedding 1 was while she was working as a carny, and was held after closing time on the Midway at some podunk county fair. I may well have been the only sober person there, and there were definitely more tattoos than teeth in attendant. She wound up leaving him when he turned out to be an abusive, self-centered WW contributed nothing to taking care of their kid. Wedding 2, just last year, was mostly okay, and BL is a really stand-up guy. But y'all, the WLE wedding theme was camo. My sister wore a asterisk camouflage wedding dress and matching Crocs asterisk. BL wore jeans and a dress shirt with a camo vest. The frigging cake was covered in camo-patterned ribbons, and IDK, where the she got camo-patterned silk roses, but the cake had a pile of TSC too. Story 11. Probably my dad's second marriage, along the banks of a river with trailer me's in the background. He's wearing a tuxedo t-shirt and rainbow mirror sungles. The ceremony took place at noon. He'd been drinking since 5 a.m. I had to walk one of the bridesmaids down a flight of steps as she was legally blind, and someone asked me if I was going to bang her. Asterisk size asterisk. Story 12. There were no tables and chairs, like none. They had an open bar but no ing chairs. Everyone had to put their drink on the ground and LD their plate to eat. It was crazy. Everyone just that some sort of terrible thing happened where the tables and chair people didn't bring them. But afterwards I asked her, the bride, what happened, and she just said, "Oh, we would have had to pay extra for that." Story 13. I went to a wedding and a funeral me once. Drove by it 3 times before realizing that was in fact the correct address for the venue. Reception and ceremony were there. Completely dry wedding too. Story 14. Camo print wedding dress that was borderline see-through. Walked down the aisle to the Scooby-Doo theme. No, nobody knows why they CSE that song, including the couple themselves. They divorced a few months later after they both stopped cleaning the use in an act of defiance against one another. Story 15. At my aunt's wedding with her new husband, I got drugged by one of her stepsons. Almost got raped. Luckily, one of my real cousins noticed I was gone for a long time and looked for me. He's the only one in the family who knew about my anxiety, so he worried about that. Caught the guy taking my shirt off by the kitchen counter while I was half unconscious. He called the police and I was taken me safely. Edit. I'll edit it since lots were confused, sorry. Story 16. A friend of the family is a wedding photographer. We went to dinner with her family a few weeks ago, and she explained the most bizarre wedding she had ever been to, which happened to be that same day and involved someone we all know. Asterisk wedding was behind a trailer in a trailer park asterisk folding chairs clearly labeled. There were 2 church pews and several 5-gallon buckets turned upside down. Asterisk. Some of the wedding party arrived on riding mowers. Asterisk. The bride was wearing some screen-printed t-shirt, jeans, and a veil made from cheesecloth asterisk. The groom was wearing a jean vest with no shirt underneath and torn jeans asterisk. The bride had met the groom just over 3 months prior, as the groom was still married to his first wife at the time. Divorce takes 90 days here. Do the math. Asterisk. Most of the guests were dressed like they were in the middle of doing yard work. Asterisk reception was in the same area. Several cases of PBR and Miller Lite, supermarket pre-boxed cheese and cracker spreads, and a few Bojangles fried chicken boxes. Story 17. I don't even know where to begin. Ceremony was comprised of immediate family, then followed by a reception with all guests in a relatively nice tel banquet hall. And at 7 p.m., the open bar was completely closed down because multiple guests were throwing up in the bathroom sinks, causing flooding. The groom was so wasted even before the ceremony, but was blackout by the time of reception. During the first dance, he kept his hands in his cargo pant khakis the entire time and ate dinner sitting on the floor in a corner of the hall while the bride sat at the head table alone. About 2 hours in, the groom randomly left and slept at their use, while the bride stayed in the newlywed suite by herself. They are now separated, as you may have ummed by this point. Story 18. A 2 friends from college wedding was just awkward. Bride sewed her own dress, which was a size too big. She's really slim and tiny, so she looked like she had a very conservative satin nightgown on. That was a rush job. Their first kiss was at the altar. When they finished, the pastor said, "Ah, come on, you can do better than that." During part of the ceremony, there was parents' blessing. Groom's family was quick and private, really sweet. Bride's parents were loud and they bawled while talking for 15 minutes each. Reception was potluck and not enough food for TSE attending. Wedding colors were baby blue and lavender. A mutual friend was DJ, and the mother of the bride paid him a note to read aloud to the guests. Poor guy then had to go, "Groom, your MIL says you can pet the kitties now." They previous spring break meal had gotten bride a baggy, standard-sized shirt with kittens on it. Kittens just so happened to be about bust height. I offered to do flowers, boutonniere, corsages, centerpieces. But the wedding party didn't store them as I had suggested, so the next day they were wilted and really sad. Did I mention this was a dry wedding? Story 19. It was in the middle of absolutely nowhere. It was a 5 p.m. wedding and there was no food served, and we couldn't just run out and get McDonald's or something because there was nothing around. We had to help set up tables. We had to fill out our own thank you cards. They even had an example for us to follow. Dear, thank you for the. We'll use it too. Then they asked us to help take down the tables as well. I refused to help and got the out of there. Also, no cake. Story 20. I was staying at a really mivetel about a decade ago, and a group of what I can only describe as rough-looking hippies were having a wedding reception in the ballroom. I was sitting at the bar ready to order when one of the groomsmen invited me to eat and drink. They apparently had too much food and alcohol. Of course I obliged. Free alcohol and food? Why not? When I walked in the ballroom, all I could smell was body odor mixed with a hint of food. It was so tea in that room. Some of them weren't wearing shirts, male and female alike, and almost none of them had on SES. Only a handful of people were dressed somewhat casually. It was just humid, sweaty, and warm in there. When I say rough-looking hippies, just picture that stereotype in your head, and that's W most of them looked. Instead of a DJ, they had a dude on the stage with drums, bongos, a guitar, a rain stick, and I'm pretty sure a didgeridoo. I didn't want to be rude, so all I grabbed was grilled asparagus, and then I left as soon as the guy walked out of sight. It was so disgusting in there. The next morning, I noticed they had cordoned off the ballroom area, and they had a good portion of their use-keeping staff stacking trash bags into DSE rolling garbage bins. I felt so bad for them. Story 21. I went to a wedding that had a Matrix theme. The groomsmen all wore floor-length leather jackets and tiny sungles. The MC made a slideshow of images from the movie with the groomsmen's faces badly toe-stepped on. They insisted on calling each other Neo and Amorpheus while high-fiving each other. It was painful. There was a lot of tension at the wedding, and it turned out that the groom had cheated on the bride a few weeks earlier, but she had still decided to marry him. His family was really trashy and took the view that their son had cheated because the bride wasn't good enough for him. The bride's family was not trashy, but that she took him back and obviously hated the groom and his Thai family. The sister was the maid of Noor, and her speech was very sarcastic. Just so glad to welcome you to the family, Greg. But it went over the heads of the groom's relatives. Everyone knew the story was cringing. The groom's dad was loaded. He stood up and told a long and convoluted story about a wife giving teas of sugar to God, which made no sense and seemed to have very ist undertones. They cut quickly to the music, and the drunk groom's father hit the dance floor and started grinding with some woman who wasn't his wife. His wife sees and has a fit and starts screaming at him. They won't stop fighting, so they cut the music and have the four-piece high school band play clical music badly. It includes a squeaky clarinet. Like a terrible foreshadowing from above, it starts with rain and people start trying to politely leave. Last thing I see is the groomsmen running to their cars with their trench coats folded up over their heads to protect their tiny sungles, while the band plays the squeaky Matrix theme song. It was amazing. Edit. I forgot to mention that they were all cops, and it was in New Zealand, so you can reread it and imagine Kiwi accents. Hi, fueva morpheus. Story 22, really old friend of my wife's. She hadn't seen her in years, but was invited to her wedding. The guy this chick was marrying was absolute, I studied the blade levels of cringe. He was shirtless, wore black jeans, and his arms were covered in barbed wire tattoos and quotes that you'd find on TSC idiotic bad skeleton memes, where they point guns at you and claim they'll you up if you hurt anyone I care about, kind of. It was quickly apparent my wife and I were the only ones in attendance that didn't live in a trailer park and practiced normal human hygiene. They were roasting what I thought was a ling pig on a spit, but as it cooked, I noticed bubbling out of it, and its stomach was swelling. I asked his best man if this was a properly slaughtered pig, and the best man proceeds to regale me with the tale of WW he and the groom got faced the night before, climbed into a nearby farm, and stole this pig. They slit it in the head and impaled it with a long piece of rebar, which upon closer inspection was what it was turning on. Just so happens, while we were discussing the groom's recent crime, the pig's stomach exploded. Blood and guts poured out in enough quantities to put out the fire. Wife and I had already given each other the, yeah, time for us to GTFO of Dodge look before this, but yeah, needless to say we beelined for the car and left. We later found out the cops sweat up and arrested the groom and his best man once the farmer they stole from realized one of his prized pigs was missing. The groom tried to fight the cops and got tased. He made it easy for them by already being shirtless. Yep. Story 23. My friends told me my dog could be my +1 at their wedding. At first I said, what? No. But they insisted because Buddy is a great dog and I am a sad single person. So I put a tie on the dog and we went to a wedding. Story 24. Probably going to get buried, but went to a fancy wedding at a beautiful venue. It was an incredible outdoor ceremony, with the reception inside a super fancy lakefront venue. All went well until the bride's dad stood up to give a toast. The bride's dad and her mother had been divorced since she was little, so at least 26 years they've been divorced. The bride's side of the family is very well off, and with about 200 people in attendance, he essentially roasted the bride's mother for 10-15 minutes. He was talking about W she used to the tennis instructor he paid for. Then he went down the list naming the guys she dated after him. W, she couldn't hold a job and just used his money. The mom had her current husband there, and then he turned his attention to that guy and was roasting on him for being the flavor of the week. And WW, he won't be around when his daughter is back from her honeymoon. He then moved on back to the mother and really laid into her again. I mean, he was off the rails. It was like a Comedy Central roast of the bride's mom, but fueled by his apparent hatred for her. I had been drinking a lot, so at first I thought I was mishearing things, but the longer it went on, I was sure I wasn't. I have no idea no one stopped this, but they literally let him go on until he was done uninterrupted. He did not mention his daughter or the groom once. He just roasted his ex-wife the WL time. Story 25. Waitress at a bogan wedding. The night ended with the chef and I rounding up the kids and barricading us all in the kitchen and locking the doors to prevent the melee of fighting adults outside from A, accessing more weapons, some of them BYO'd knives, and B, hurting the kids. They ranged in age from toddlers to preteens. It was just the chef and I, 2 women and a WLE bunch of screaming and frightened kids, until the police came and carted everyone off to jail. Wedding photographer sweat up the next morning for the scheduled potosat. I had to tell him he could find the wedding party at the local jail. The chef and I are still friends, but we both quit that place shortly after that epic wedding. Story 26. They met and married within months. He was 40s, she was upper 20s or low 30s. I was sooked she was getting married. Sect asterisk. This asterisk was the guy and sect that I was invited. Felt like I had to go. He had like 3 preteens that did whatever they wanted and lived in the backs. Wedding was at his cabin property, potluck style. Wedding was just them standing in the yard. No seating, no grouping of friends or families or sides of an aisle, just hang out and watch them do their thing. No photographer. When they kissed, everyone pulled out guns and sawed them off. I hadn't noticed the guns or seen that anyone was carrying, so it was a SCK. Then the happy couple rode off on an ATV into the S for a victory lap. They came back and we all ate swamp people food and everyone was sloshed. I left early with a friend and on the drive me we were like, so, what the was that? They obviously divorced certainly after. Story 27. A friend's wedding. She was walking down the aisle and had to pause to put out her cigarette. It was a small wedding and her friends thought it was hilarious. Married less than 2 years. She married him because he was in the military, and she thought she was getting cash for life. He CSE deployment to a war zone over staying with her. Story 28. Ooh, I've got one. Okay, so the bride was my older cousin. We were all from the Midwest, but she's been living with her family in a small town in the SE. Approximately 30 family members flew drive-in from out of state, one two-way across the country. This was going to be her first marriage, to a man that was not the father of any of her 4 children, each from different fathers. This was the middle of summer in the American Southeast. So, muggy. To skip forward a bit, there was no air conditioning at the family the motel, the church, or the reception hall. So everyone was sweating in their nice clothes the WL time. I'll start by our motel. Some of the parents were going to have their own rooms, and the kids and 2 older kids were going to be in their own room. The first thing that happens is that the kids get locked in the room. A previous tenant had bashed in the door, so they couldn't open the door once it closed behind them. We tried picking up the peony to call the front desk, but the peony's cord and jack had been ripped out of the wall. Some of the younger kids were freaking out because of all of the palmetto bugs flying around the room. Motel staff ended up breaking the window because the window was painted shut, and then never offered to move the children into another room until we asked for it. When we got together at the bride's parents' the bride's dad, my uncle, and amusingly my godfather, never got up from his recliner. Even Tuck, we hadn't seen him in more than 10 years, where he was watching VHS tapes of late 80s WrestleMania. He had an apple box next to the sofa, heaping full with empty Miller High Life cans. First, we found out that 2 of the groomsmen couldn't attend the wedding because they were arrested for cocaine distribution. So one of my older cousins was recruited to replace one of them because he was about the same size, so he could fit in the rented suit. We then found out that 2 of the bridesmaids couldn't attend the wedding because they couldn't get the day of work from the Kmart. So since we were already down 1 groomsman, we only needed 1 replacement bridesmaid. The trouble was, nobody would fit the rented dress. So one of my cousins was recruited to stand with the bridesmaids, with the dress draper over her shoulder. We get to the actual ceremony and it turned out nobody bought a unity candle to light turning the ceremony. So the minister sent his wife to Kmart to pick up a $1 plain white candle. The ceremony started before she got back and paused for a very long feeling 10-ish minutes until she came back with the candle. The bride's flow bouquet was a very fake-looking potted sunflower. After the ceremony, we went to the reception. There were not going to be any beverages provided until the bride's mom, my aunt, my dad's sister. This will be important later. Used their refrigerator rent money, they didn't own their fridge, to buy a couple of cases of Sprite. At the reception, they asked me to be the DJ. They knew I worked at a record store, so they thought I'd be a good DJ, apparently. The groom, last minute, decided he really wanted a limo for the wedding, so they canceled the DJ they had and rented a limo. More on this later. To take the DJ's place, they put a boombox up on a table in the corner of the hall and gave me their CDs. My heart sank when I looked through their CDs, all country or rap. So I started playing music from the artists I knew, and everything skipped. The CDs were stacked with toot cases, and people just slid them back and forth across each other when looking through them. Apparently, they also had a party the night before where they got thrown around. Bottom line is, the only 2 CDs that didn't skip were a Leanne Rimes CD and the Dr. Dolittle soundtrack. So, I just switched between TSE 2 albums. Then the limo arrived, a 70s-looking Cadillac, smoking. After a few minutes of trying to figure out what was going on, they opened the odd, and there was a fire under the odd. At this point, people are pretty hungry. The bride comes over to thank my parents for the gift, and that food was on the way and said something like, and there was enough money left over that I could get these beautiful acrylic nails. As the wedding gift, my parents gave them $150 to use for food, since there wouldn't have been food otherwise. The food arrives. It's 19x13 aluminum pan of baked beans and 19x13 of fully cooked but still partly frozen chicken wings from her friend's catering company. The groom's family rushes the food and took it all. There was 0 food left for anyone from the side of the family that traveled 1,000 miles and actually paid for the food. After about 3 URs of country and rap, my aunts and uncles that have traveled in and are all of German heritage wanted to dance to one polka. So one of my aunts went to their car, and they had actually brought along a tape with the song on it. After getting the go-ahead from the bride, the song is started, and within seconds, the groom's entire side goes, "Oh, he'll know," and leaves. Every single person. So now it's just the wedding party, and the bride's side of the family left at the reception hall. They had to leave the hall clean, so we all started to pitch in and clean. Meanwhile, everyone notices the bride's dad sitting alone at the bar, drinking his own booze. My dad has always resented him for marrying his sister, and them moving the family so far away to live near the military base he was discharged from, and then basically giving up on life, becoming an alcoholic, and let the family live a really low-income life feeding off his disability. Seeing him just sit while the rest of the family cleaned upset my dad, so he walked over to ask him to help the family clean. Nobody heard what they said to each other until we heard a crash of a bar stool hitting the floor. We looked over, and my dad's elding him up off the ground by the back of his suit jacket, like elding a puppy by the scruff of its neck. My dad was a bigger guy, worked in a factory for 30 years, an EMT and fireman, grew up a farmer, played high school football, etc. But was a teddy bear in terms of temperament. My uncle godfather was maybe 120 pounds wet. My dad put him down, pushed the broom up to his chest until he grabbed it, and walked away. My uncle started sweeping to everyone's SCK, having never seen him work a day in his life. After we cleared out and locked up the reception hall, my family went to a KFC for dinner since we hadn't had anything to eat all day, even after technically paying for lunch. We originally tried Denny's, but there was a sign on the door that they were closed so that the staff could have dinner. When we got back to the motel, there was a message waiting for my dad, asking if he'd after butchered a snake. One of my aunts/uncles/cousins traveled in, brought their little dog. During the ceremony, it was left behind at the bride's parents' use, but some managed to open the rear sliding door and went outside. The back of the property had a narrow waterway running behind it. A large snake had killed and was trying to swallow the small dog. Someone killed the snake by bashing its head, and they called my dad, the avid hunter and former farmer did have to slaughter the occasional animal to try to get the dog out of the snake so it could be buried. He said no. The next day was gift opening at the bride's parents' me. As they started opening gifts, many of them personalized, they noticed a pattern. Their last name was misspelled on almost every item. It turns out that the friend W offered to print their wedding invitations with their color dot matrix printer as their gift, spelled the groom's last name wrong, and they didn't want to upset the friend and ask her to reprint. So everyone W used the invitation as the guide for W to spell the personalized gift, had it spelled wrong. In the end, the groom also got arrested and sent to prison for his connection to the same incidents that lead to the two groomsmen's cocaine distribution issues, and the marriage was annulled. But the bride kept his last name, TLDR. Lots of baby daddies, sketchy motel, VHS tapes of WrestleMania, a huge box of empty beer cans next to the recliner, can't get time off from Kmart, cocaine arrests, wearing a dress over their arm because it didn't fit, ceremony delay due to Kmart trip, refreshments paid for with refrigerator rent money, Dr. Doolittle old limo catches fire, not enough baked beans and frozen chicken wings, entire half of the family leaves because they don't like one song, nearly a fight from brewing decades-long animosity, Denny's closed for dinner, snake eats a family pet, misspelling on nearly every gift, and finally more cocaine arrests and marriage annulment. Story 29. Ooh, I've got one of these. But it was a fake wedding, unknown to the guests ahead of time. Many of the details are things we found out later. So, the wedding. Everything felt very tense, and groom looked like he might cry standing at the altar. Bride entered in a dress that didn't fit properly. It had a large long skirt with op, but the dress was too SRT and the op was too big, so it sat up on an angle and bounced around awkwardly as she moved. The ceremony itself seemed quite strained, and having recently been married ourselves, the wife and I noticed that the celebrant didn't say the specific line legally required for a wedding in Australia, and no paperwork was signed, also required in Australia. At the reception, almost all of Table 1, which had bride-groom's families, turned out it was groom's family that left immediately after the reception started. Groom's dad was meant to pay for the bar tab, but did not do so before leaving. Bride and groom avoided each other apart from an incredibly awkward first dance. They separated weeks later. So, flashing back a bit, bride and groom were quite young, but with bride several years older than groom. They'd been dating for a while, and a lot of people in our circle of friends had been getting married. Bride was very set on marriage, and groom proposed willingly. As time went on, groom was getting cold feet. He didn't want to break up with bride, or even necessarily to call off the engagement, but wasn't ready to be married. Bride was not pleased and pressured groom to continue. Groom's parents were in very poor health at the time, and when groom tried to say he wasn't ready again, Bride started to har his parents about him trying to back out. Groom foolishly agreed to go ahead with the wedding in order to stop this harment. Bride was still not happy with Groom's attitude and asked the celebrant to come talk to them. Ping, he would talk Groom around. Celebrant, being an absolute legend, and really just doing his job properly, refused to marry them once he was told that one party was unwilling, offering the compromise that he could officiate a commitment ceremony, which is not legally binding. Bride took him up on this offer, but insisted on not telling anyone and pretending it was a proper wedding. In Australia, some paperwork needs to be filed 30 days in advance, so there was no time to get an alternative celebrant, and there were evidently a lot of deposits which were not refundable so close to the event. Story 30. Everyone got super drunk before wedding starts. Even Groom throw up on the stage while Bride is hardly walk straight to him with drunk AF face. Come and think of it, maybe funniest one. Story 31. My own. In a Mississippi judge's office with a bag of Cheetos on her desk, she wiped her hands on a napkin, grabbed a Bible, and did her thing with orange crumbs on her lips. Her work heels were not on because she was in her office. It was extremely rush. I understand that she was on her break, but we didn't mind waiting. IDK why they rushed us through. Story 32. Had a buddy woo-wee was engaging in a marriage we all knew was going to fail. The night before at the bachelor party, we're all sitting around after he went to bed, wondering why he was marrying her. She was a rude, stuck-up woman, basically bullied him into it, but he's an adult, so we just let him do his thing. We go to the wedding the next day and there's like 10 people. Our buddy is elding the ring and is shaking hands and drops it. When he can't find it, her dad comes up in the middle of the service in his sleeveless t-shirt, a beer in his hands, and sungles on, and starts yelling at our buddy to find the ing ring. He is literally on his hands and knees, combing the GR in front of everyone trying to find this thing. Eventually, his fiancée joins in on cussing him out and storms off. Eventually, she came back and exclaimed, I needed to drink a beer and smoke a cigarette, but I'm fine now. We never found the ring, and he just pretended to put it on her finger. They divorced 6 months later. We came clean about our confusion about the marriage, and he said he didn't know why he asked her either.